This is the dollar at the dollar store. I hope it's a pointer that works. No. That's what happens when you go to the dollar store. So, now because it's a history, I have to read some of it. I don't like reading, but the historical context, I have to. This talk examines the history of motivation psychology from the start of the 20th century to about 1975, centering on the study of achievement strivings, the interrelations among the theorists, and the effects of environmental events such as World War II on this history. It's more up close than the typical scientific writing, highlighting little-known facts and titillating anecdotes, and based on the belief that personal life and scientific work are interactive. So there's going to be a lot of anecdotes, personal facts, and sometimes you're not sure, is this correct, is this not correct? No? Yeah. So as far as I think, everything I'm going to say is documentally true, and when it's not, when it's uncertain, I'll say, who knows? You know, often the historians give you contradictory facts, or contradictory opinions. So this is a selective history with only a subset of important contributors discussed, and they're all but one are deceased. 4 psychologists are featured. It's David McClelland, who Sandra mentioned, Kurt Levine, she also mentioned, John Atkinson, my mentor, and Fritz Heider. In order of appearance, that's the order in which I'll be talking about. And each is associated with achievement research, but they represent different theoretical orientations. So with McClelland, we're talking about trait theory, Loon, we'll talk about Gestalt theory, Atkinson, expectancy value theory, and Heider, attribution theory. Now, how did I select which individuals to talk about? Because a number of people deserve to be in this history that were omitted. First, there were little-known aspects of their lives, sometimes frailties, but often special strengths and characteristics. They had influential or contentious relationships with members of competing theoretical tribes. They represent, like so far, I talked about 4 theoretical approaches, but a 5th one is also in there. We have trait theory with McClelland drive, and now it's also drive theory, which I didn't mention before, with Hall. Gestalt theory, expectancy value theory, and attribution theory, which arguably emerged in that historical progression. And they're linked with often with historically incorrect beliefs about intellectual lineage. And or I had some personal contact or indirect contact with the person and possess some, I think, generally unshared knowledge. So it's my hope that this knowledge gets passed down to the subsequent generations. So I'm going to start with trait theory. The trait approach was an outgrowth of instinct theory, which perhaps provided the initial scientific step to understand motivated behavior. How's this sound back there? Okay. In the simplest form, this view specifies that motivation is determined by some instinctive disposition or personal characteristic. Hence, causation resides within the person. That doesn't mean the environment is excluded. It means that the person. For example, achievement strivings are believed to vary according to the strength of a personality trait. You can believe it is conscientiousness, dominance, or need for achievement. With greater achievement desires due to having more of this quality. Now, there's usually 2 sub-goals associated with this. First, you need a taxonomy of the instincts or personality characteristics. And second, you need an assessment instrument to measure the trait. So here's the organization of this trait approach. We want to get to Dave McClelland in 1950 and 1970, his main publications. To start there, we have William McDougall. He's going to be the first person I talk about in Paleo. And then they influenced McClelland through Henry Murray, so he'll be talked about. And then McClelland had 2 associates or students that I want to mention here. usually not thought about in the history of motivation. Timothy Leary, associated with LSD, and Richard Albert, or also known as Ram Dass or Rama Ram Dass. And then behaviorism comes into play here too, and I'm going to talk about the association between McDougall and John Watson. And then Watson influences Hovland, and you see Hovland influences McCullough. So that's where we're going to start. That's kind of the trait approach. So just again review it. So we're going to start with McDougall, and then go to Watson and Jung, Henry Murray, Hull, Hovland, McClelland, Leary, Albert. That's our first order, just within the traits. So there's William McDougall, 1871 to 1938. And, God willing, this is a film of McDougall. You may never again see a film of McDougall. That's McDougall in the middle. And I don't know what year this is taken. I'm going to guess 1928. Around there. Carl Zenger, who was at Duke University, translated a number of Lewin's books, and that's Kurt Lewin on it. Right. So this history begins with the prolific and ubiquitous William McDougall, trained in medicine in London, self-labeled anthropologist, student of biology, genetics, intelligence, physiology, writer of textbooks in social and normal psychology, and a motivation theorist. Now, McDougall described his vision of motivation in perhaps the initial textbook in social psychology, An Introduction to Social Psychology, in 1908. He advocated what he called hormic or impulse psychology, contending that individuals are motivated by inherited instincts or propensity. These instincts do not result in fixed action patterns. Rather, they elicit purposive behavior and directed toward desired goals. McDougall further proposed that each instinct influences perception and emotion. So influence of perception and emotion. So for example, the instinct of flight, the influence of perception is the objects contain danger, elicit this, and then it's mediated by the emotion of fear. So you see an object contain danger, you feel fear, and you fly away. Like many other instinct theorists at that time, including Freud, McDougall could not decide on which or how many instincts exist. There was also a circular logic about their reality. So one motivation theorist teased, if he twiddles his thumbs, it's the thumb twiddling instinct. If he does not twiddle his thumbs, it's the thumb not twiddling instinct. One of McDougall's list of instincts included escape, that was linked with fear, combat, accompanied by anger, repulsion, connected to disgust, and others. All current instinct, and there's still a number of people who posit these instincts. It's always the issue of are these really the fixed number of instincts? For the purpose of this talk, what's most essential is that, according to McDougall, behavior primarily is caused by dispositional qualities that are fixed in number, and shared by individuals, but they vary in strength. Now, McDougall counted among his friends his idol William James and the magician Harry Houdini, with whom he shared interests but not opinions about the paranormal. Houdini didn't think much of paranormal. And Carl Jung. Jung was his psychoanalyst. And McDougall was also a medical doctor, so during the war he treated shell-shocked veterans. McDougall said that his analysis didn't believe him much because he was perfectly normal. Now, McDougall knew that he had many enemies in the public, especially among scientists, including John Watson, the founder of behaviorism. Furthermore, his scientific and personal reputation had disintegrated over time, and he was negatively portrayed in the press. Now, there's a number of reasons for this decline, including question of an instinct doctrine. First, I mentioned that he had a very strong belief in paranormal phenomena, and he was editor of the Journal of Parapsychology. You won't be able to read it there, but his name is under the editorship. Following his initial appointment at Oxford, McDougall came to America in 1920, where he pursued interest in mental telepathy and clairvoyance. He did this with William James to go seances that had strong belief in paranormal phenomena. 7 years later, he became chairperson of the psychology department at Duke. It's unclear why he left Harvard for Duke. He's such an elitist. I've read in some places that there was a scandal involving some of these paranormal phenomena and seances. I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, at Duke, he established a parapsychology lab. This is what it looked like. And the person was spending time with figures, thinking about one, and questions what that person was thinking about. The lab later came under the direction of Joseph Ryan and his wife, also Louisa Ryan. That lab subsequently moved off campus and existed until about 10 years ago. A second cause of scientific skepticism was McDougall's belief that acquired characteristics could be inherited. An evolutionary position he inherited from Lamarck. He conducted animal investigations on this generally unaccepted theory and was falsely convinced after training more than 30 generations of rats in an escape learning task that he had proved his position. What he did was train rats in an escape learning task, and then he'd inbreed the rats who had learned this task, and then he'd measure the speed of learning in the next generation. Then he'd do this over 30 generations, and found that over generations there was faster learning. So he said, see, the acquired characteristic is inherited. He didn't have control groups, and the real reason was that the experimenters were just getting better. So, unfortunately, Pavlov made the same mistake. It's a very similar experiment. Anyway, this is the second reason he was falling into disbelief, paranormal phenomena, Lamarck. But finally, McDougall was perceived as, and probably was, a racist. Anthropological observations in Guinea and Borneo, remember he was self-trained in anthropology, along with his acceptance of genetically transmitted instincts and the inheritance of intelligence, led him to endorse negative racial stereotypes, particularly regarding African Americans, a position disturbingly held by a number of other psychologists at the time. In books and lectures, McDougall expressed concern about the decline of America because of the differential birth rates between racial groups, and what he regarded as low fertility among the elite class. He advocated eugenics to stop biological degeneration, and this is all written in this book, Is America Safe for Democracy, in 1921. So the importance that McDougall gave to inborn instincts and his overlooking the roles played by learning and the environment in behavior eventuated in a public debate with John Watson. While Watson's philosophy may have been more acceptable to the American public than that of McDougall, his personal behavior was not. So here's John Watson. He's the Clark Gable of psychology. Now, when Watson was invited, received the invitation to debate McDougall, so he was invited. McDougall was in decline, and a lot of questions about it. Genetics, eugenics. Watson received an invitation to debate McDougall, and the debate took place in 1924. At that time, he was sitting at his office desk in the J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency in New York, about to be promoted to vice president, a very high salary. He no longer was professor at Johns Hopkins University, which was his primary academic. The transformation from academics to business was not entirely of his choosing. Many know of Watson's investigation with Bernard Weiner, conditioning little Albert to fear a white rat by pairing his presence with a loud and unpleasant noise. By the way, a number of historians have said that Watson also had a phobia, so he used fear of darkness. I can't verify that, but more than one historian has said it. This was his reference experiment, guided by Pavlov's studies to document conditioned fear and support his position that all behavior is learned, and there are no inborn instincts or need for motivation constructs. But Weiner was more than just a lab assistant. She had been having an affair with Watson. that was brought to light when his suspecting wife, Mary Ickes, the sister of the future Secretary of the Interior under Franklin Roosevelt, Harold Ickes, searched for and found confirming love letters in Rainer's bedroom. It's an interesting story. She suspected Watson and Rainer having an affair. They were invited to the Rainer's family. They were close friends with the parents of Rainer. They were invited for dinner. And she pretended, Mary Ickes pretended that she was feeling ill. And kind of wanted to go upstairs and rest. Of course, she went to her husband's bedroom and found a love letter. Now, Watson's character had been called into question before, including the conditioning of little Albert. And you probably know little Albert died when he was 7. And these conditioning trials took place sometimes over 6-month periods. A lot of questions about the data from the little Albert experiments. Anyway, a divorce followed. This was, in 1910 or something, so if you're having an affair, divorce follows. Amid the demands of the upper-class community in Baltimore, that Watson be asked to resign his professorship. See, Rainer's parents and the mayor and the governor, they were all close, and the mayor and the governor held the funds to Johns Hopkins, and they said, he has to resign, you don't get any money. So Watson resigned, surrendered the position, married Miss Rainer the following year. They had a very good marriage. She died very unexpectedly about a decade later, and then became alcoholic. Anyway, after his resignation, he pursued a successful business career, very successful business career, in part fostered by data-driven decisions. Some of the initial surveys in the business world of Watson, and it's said that he formulated some of the initial advertising slogans. In my era, it's true that, again, I'm not totally sure they're both his, but at least he did some of it. And one was good to the last drop. Remember that, Adele? McDonald's coffee, good to the last drop. And then LSMFT, I don't know if you don't know that, but Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. And I remember that. Watson was smart. He's the youngest PhD in the history of the university. So, anyway, Watson continued writing and giving lectures about behaviorism after leaving academia. He had acrimonious exchanges with McDougall regarding the subject matter and methods of psychology, and therefore was the choice of the Psychological Club of Washington, D.C. to debate McDougall. The event took place at the Memorial Constitution Hall, right around here. So, I think it's right around here. I mean, this is not the debate, obviously, this is a concept, but that's the Constitution Hall. There was anywhere from 300 to 1,000 attendees, the reports vary, but at the time there were less than 500 members of APA, so just to give you an indication of how big an event this was. The battle lines were clear: nature versus nurture. Nature, McDougall, nurture. Watson, genetics versus learning. Watson versus McDougall versus Watson. Biological degeneration versus endless possibilities. I'm going to give you a case. The two contestants were equally contrasting. The traditional English faithful academic versus the young and handsome American philanderer. They apparently had contempt for one another. Watson, alluding to McDougall's paranormal pursuit, stated, "No one knows just how the idea of the supernatural started. It probably had its origins in the general laziness of mankind." Now, McDougall said, there is an advantage that, namely that all persons of common sense will of necessity be on my side. This is all published in the book, The Battle of Behaviorism. Actually, I have this book, so that's it. And here it says John Watson, late professor of psychology. It doesn't mean he's dead. It just means he was thrown. It just means he was thrown out of Johns Hopkins. Reports differ on the winner of the debate and how this was determined. So find that out. It was either determined by a panel of voters or by the Psychology Club attendees. McDougall claimed that a majority of women voted for Watson because of his good looks. But as McDougall faded further from view, Watson exerted even more sway on the course of psychology, including the field of motivation, which was soon to be dominated by Clark Hall and neo-behaviorism. So that's McDougall and Watson and the Watson-McDougall debate. And now on return, remember we started with McDougall, and I talked about McDougall being analyzed by Jung, so I'm going to go back to Carl Jung. Anything on anybody's mind so far? Any questions? Anybody want to ask anything, or add anything, or say anything? Once or twice? Anything? Terry? No, nothing? Yanni, you got anything to say? Carl Jung. I retreat from American behaviorism and return to Europe and the trait theory narrative. Much has been written about the Swiss-born Carl Jung, particularly regarding his conflict with Freud. Here are only a few commentaries provided that concerns his powerful influence on Henry Murray, with this word, right? Murray's influence on Cohen. Jung approached psychology from a rather mystical perspective. His religious background even played a role in the philosophy of alcoholism. Jung's advice to an alcoholic patient was to seek change in spiritual experience. That was indirectly passed on to Bill Wilson, who was the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And this formed the foundation of the AA program. So here's a letter from Wilson to Jung. I give Dr. Jung a great appreciation for what we do. May I first introduce myself as Bill Ruggie, co-founder of the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous. Though you have surely heard of us, I doubt if you're aware that a certain conversation you once had with one of your patients, Mr. Roland H., back in the early 1930s, played a critical role in the founding of our fellowship. And so you can see that it's authentic. Here's Jung replying. Your letter has been very welcome. Indeed, I had no news from Roland H. anymore, and you can see it signed. So that's quite interesting. I didn't know before I read this Jung's influence on Anonymous. Now, among Jung's quest was to ascertain the contents of both the so-called personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. An early contribution to promote an understanding of the personal unconscious was the development of an empirical approach, examining the latency as well as the content of word associations. Jung believed that this projective test yields information about personality complexes that give rise to dysfunctional behavior. Here's one of these earliest data sheets from Jung. You can see the reaction time. If you see water deep, the reaction time is 5 minutes. It's a long time for the experimenter to wait. And then when he asks it again, you see these same words that go right after the time. Different responses. Now, to study the collective unconscious, which he speculated contains a genetically based body of shared knowledge, Jung analyzed dreams and other symbols, noting a similarity in their appearance across cultures and throughout history. Of particular significance to Jung was a set of dreams and drawings by a patient, Christina Morgan. And I'm going to talk about her in detail, Christina Morgan. She subsequently became a lifelong companion to Murray and persuaded Murray to be analyzed by Jung. In addition to detection and measurement instruments regarding the unconscious, Jung was firmly rooted in the study of personality and development of a taxonomy or typology of personal characteristics. His system focuses on the distinction between introverts and extroverts. He coined that word. And rational versus irrational types. Another Swiss scientist who shared an intellectual history with Jung, which traces back to Eugene Breuer, that's him, was Hermann Rorschach. Rorschach in part developed his ink blot test to assess Jungian types. And this is Brett. They are similar. Okay. All that brings us finally to Henry Murray. First, what's Jung's legacy to Murray? Identification of important personality characteristics. Concern with personality classification. Existence of the unconscious. Quest for a window to find these unknown forces. And finally, we have Henry Murray. 1893 to 1988. I saw him once at an APA conference. I had an opportunity to speak there. Murray must have been quite comfortable thinking about a taxonomy of personality or list of basic needs. In addition to his medical degree, Murray obtained a doctorate in biochemistry. So he is quite familiar with periodic tables and the classification of fundamental elements. Sure, now here's the kind of twist. Shortly following his medical training, Murray's life took a dramatic turn. He met Christiana Morgan. Both were married at the time, it's 1923. She already had a child. Miss Morgan was an impressive figure, really impressive, a product of a finishing school, a nurse during World War I, a suffragette, and she also had or was to have affairs with Chaim Weizmann, who became president of Israel, the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, the writer Lewis Mumford, and of course with Henry Murray. After their initial meeting, Miss Morgan, who included art and psychoanalysis among her myriad interests, introduced Murray to the writings of Jung. Murray was immediately smitten. Both then traveled to Europe with their families to experience living abroad and to consult Jung. Jung was equally fascinated with Morgan. Her dreams, drawings, and visions provided him the window he saw to study the unconscious and were the focus of a long series of seminars, so-called vision seminars. For Murray, admiration of Jung seems to have been his impetus to pursue psychology. And Jung urged him to maintain both his marriage and relationship with Miss Morgan, which paralleled his own life, which also included marriage to another woman. In so doing, Jung contributed to the so-called Murray-Morgan affair, which lasted until her death about 40 years later. The death has been attributed to a suicide. Toward the end of her life, Morgan became very ill, very serious and painful injuries. She became alcoholic. And Murray wouldn't marry her. You see him after she died, he married someone else. She was found in a pond. And they were in the Caribbean. She was found in a pond with about 2 feet of water in it. There were 2 explanations for the death. One was that she was alcoholic and fell and injured herself and died. A second explanation was that it was a suicide, because of her despondency, she was in a depression. I have a third explanation, which I have to be careful about saying publicly. You guess what it is, and I'm 60% certain. Murray killed her. Because they had very violent relationship also. So this is just a personal belief. And, now that I'm going to retire, I should go to the Caribbean and see if I can pick up any records. The worst, I'll be in the Caribbean, but the best, it would be history also. My son's a historian, so I follow in his footsteps. Following his trip to Europe, Murray became an assistant professor and later director of the Harvard Clinic, which was first established by Martin Prince. Martin Prince, who is known as uncovered the split personalities, or the 3 faces of Eve. Morgan was also hired, and together they developed the thematic apperception test to study the unconscious. Indeed, a number of the TAT pictures were drawn by Morgan. However, over time, her name was dropped from the publication authors. She was not a member of the Harvard faculty. She didn't like the publicity. But, there's a question on the SAT who developed the TAT, and the correct answer supposedly is Murray, but I think Morgan should be at least equal credit, probably more. In addition to his activities as a psychologist, I don't know if you noticed, Murray was an international expert on Moby Dick. Really considered one of the top 3 experts on Moby Dick in the world. Never published anything. He had a 1,500-page manuscript, which he was always finishing. Never did. But he certainly had a reputation as the Moby Dick expert. During his period at the Harvard Clinic, Murray broadened his approach to the study of personality, including anthropologists and other social scientists, to fully explore the meaning of lives, paralleling the process of a group-determined medical diagnosis. This breadth was most clearly revealed in the highly selective book explorations and personality. At the core of his thinking was an identification of basic psychological needs. He recognized that the search for a taxonomy did not differ very much from McDougall's pursuit, although the concept of need, still thought of as an internal force, replaced that of instinct. Further, he regarded needs as learned rather than innate. He postulated 20 needs. They range from basement, achievement, affiliation, aggression, finally, sex, sacraments, understanding. Of course, the same criticisms leveled at the instinct theories were applied to Murray. Why these 20? What's the evidence? And so on. Because of this and other scientific disagreements, some of the Harvard faculty, particularly Carl Lashley, a scientist, and Edward Boring, the historian, wanted to dismiss Murray and close the clinic. Murray never then was not fired, but only had a 5-year appointment at Harvard, and was rehired for another 5 years and then retired. But he was not a tenured faculty at Harvard. Now, McDougall was among the psychologists to write letters that kept Murray on his job. Okay, that's interesting. Murray, and now I want to go back. We went from Hugo, Watson, and Jung, and Murray, and I want to go back to follow the Watson drive-through trail. This is Clark Hall. Anything in anybody's mind? Feel free to ask anything. Anything in anybody's mind? Too late. No, they didn't all of them. So some did. But there was still a number of human sales but certainly Jung was one, and Murray was very much in his 90s. Watson was 70, but again died of alcohol. But certainly Murray and Jung. McDougall was also in the 70s. This is Clark Hall. McClellan's intellectual heritage, the focus of current concern. You'll find out that Hall done very, very well. Here you see it here. You have to subtract, but it looks small. 8, 16. McClellan's intellectual heritage, the focus of current concern, includes not only Murray, but extended to Clark Hall and Carl Hovland at Yale University. The discrepancy in the philosophy of psychology at Yale University versus that of Murray's Harvard Clinic was infinitely greater than their geographical separation, although both were part of interdisciplinary programs. The 1930s and 40s was dominated by Clark Hall, a committed behaviorist, guided by the dictates of Pavlov and Watson and Thorndike. After forays into mental testing and the study of hypnosis, Hall turned toward learning and motivation. Didn't include notions of consciousness or mentalistic concepts. All the deterrents of behavior were reduced to physical terms. Now, this mechanistic view may have been especially compatible with Hall because earlier in his life he aspired to be a mining engineer. But following 2 years of study, he contracted polio. And then had trouble walking, had to abandon engineering. Here you see Clark Hall on my right, and you see he has the cane in his left hand. This is Hall, all the gentlemen have half, but he's the tallest one. Just barely see the cane. In addition, so he found his calling in psychology after giving up engineering because of polio. In addition, this is funny, his decision to become a behaviorist was fostered by a series of lectures by Kurt Kafka, the Gestalt psychologist. I'll talk about Kafka later. Hall invited him to speak. Hall was at the University of Wisconsin. He said the lectures were so bad, he totally gave up on the concept and helped him. Now, Hall's goal was to develop a general theory of motivation, identifying all the determinants of behavior, specifying the mathematical relations. So this is a totally different, groundbreaking change in the theory of motivation, instincts, innate propensities to a mathematical approach to motivation. He contended the main determinants of behavior were driving habit, of although he proposed other motivational factors as well. Incentive K. I say why there's incentive rating with a K. It was named after Kenneth Spence. So K for Kenneth. And there you see has this little formula, drive plus incentive times habit. Now Hull was so influential that in the 40s, sometimes 70% of the articles in psychology cited Hull. 70%, unbelievable. And of course, he trained many of the most well-known psychologists: Neil Miller, Holbert Bauer, Robert Sears, Kenneth Spence, Carl Hull. They were in psychology. I remember when I was a student, Atkinson complained so much that the drive theories were dominating, and he couldn't get things published because he was dominated by all. Now I meant to, whoops. This is Carl Hull. Hull is not usually associated with Hull because he was a very prominent social psychologist identified with the study of attitude change, communication, and persuasion. But his doctoral dissertation examined response generalization. And he collaborated with Hull on a monograph, Mathematical Deductive Theory of Rote Learning. But during World War II, many psychologists served in the Army, and they altered their interest to focus on applied problems. So Murray became in charge of tests to identify officers for other strategic services. And Hovland undertook a series of projects dealing with war-related attitudes and propaganda. So Hovland was a moral behaviorist, totally changed the major figure in social psychology. Hovland died of cancer before the age of 50. Contrary to that. But prior to his death, was a key figure in the Yale department. When he was only 36 years old, Yale University offered him a prestigious Sterling professorship. He refused, contending that it should be given to Hull. The university then granted 2 such professorships. Hovland also supervised a number of important psychologists, Bernard Weiner, for study of curiosity, motivation. But Hovland was also McClelland's PhD supervisor. So McClelland's origins are through Hullian theory. Also, it's strict behaviors. So that's David McClelland. I hope it's in this but it's true. So we finally got to McClelland. It took us a while to get there. He's our first figure that we're really going to talk about. But at least he's the main immediate antecedent. This is David McClelland, born in 1917. How did McClelland cross the deep chasm between Yale and Holland behaviorism and Harvard and Murray and trade theory? Although his father at one time was a Methodist minister, McClelland became a Quaker during college. He therefore did not serve in the military during the war. Rather than maintaining his appointment as an experimental psychologist at Wesleyan University, he accepted a part-time position with the Quaker organization, the American Friends Service Committee, where he focused on problems of refugees and conscientious objectors. He also filled the void by offering to teach a course in personality at Grimoire College, so he had never taught. In fact, he used initially the notes of the teacher who was there. I know that teacher won't mention his name. Promised that the notes were so bad that he had to do his own work in personality and wrote a book. So it's noted by Dave Winder, students, this experience seems to have been the catalyst that set McClelland on the path of applying his rigorous Yale training to the field of personality as it was being studied at Harvard. Now, even though he did take the experimental atmosphere at Yale with him, McClelland had negative opinions about Hullian theory. He found it premature and overly formal, and McClelland hated all theories for that matter. He couldn't stand Atkinson's theory. That's Atkinson on the left, and as a young guy in the middle, that was me. I thought I had this stuff on a couple of pictures. Not long thereafter, not long thereafter, McClellan completed a text on personality, became immersed in achievement and a later time power needs, trait measurement, and motivational consequence of her personality traits. During this period, he developed an objective scoring system for the TAT. These are some of the typical TAT pictures that were really taken from magazines, just cut out of a magazine, something that looked good, that were drawn by Morgan. He accepted the unconscious and fantasy measurement, where he brought empirical methods to validate the instrument. A critical aspect of his empirical approach was to document that arousing a need produces greater need-related imagery on the TAT than when the need is in an unaroused state. Analogous, he said, to a thermometer reacting to heat. Part of his justification for the study of achievement needs is that they can be stimulated by failure. And that's from the Holy tradition, just as hunger could be aroused by deprivation. He then related personality needs, primarily achievement, assessed with the TAT, not always, but usually, to some depending on achievement. After the war ended, McClellan returned to Wesleyan. Soon thereafter, he accepted an appointment at Harvard, where he subsequently became chair of the Department of Social Relations. The Harvard Clinic at that time closed, or was closing right as he was coming. In addition, during this period, McClellan attempted to document that increases in achievement needs precede economic growth across time periods. He used a variety of methods to determine levels of achievement needs, ranging from TAT measurement to assessing written materials in books, and even scoring line shapes on vases, which I'm sure were pleasing to Jung. His Quaker identification also may have contributed to his desire to increase achievement striving in underdeveloped countries, and he founded numerous nonprofit companies to increase achievement strivings. He was kind of a hippie at heart, and this is a typical scene from his backyard where there were a lot of do-gooders, and McClellan would be in the middle, kind of like a guru with his students. In sum, McClellan brought the study of needs or traits or motives into the laboratory and created a platform on which subsequent human motivation researchers could stand. Some predecessors, including McDougall, Jung, and Murray, set the stage by championing a list of needs and fantasy measurement. Other predecessors, Watson, Hall, Hovland, supplied the scientific methods. McClellan, with one foot at Harvard and the other at Yale, bridged this divide. So he's a key figure. Okay, we finally got to McClellan, and now I want to talk about two of his colleagues, associates, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. Timothy Leary, many of you know that name. He didn't alter the field of motivation, neither did Richard Alpert, but they did change American cultural history. And one of the surprising things about the field of motivation is that it has a major cultural impact. I'm going to talk later on about the Tolman, his cultural impact. So this is Timothy Leary. He had a very checkered academic history. As an undergraduate, he was dismissed from West Point, believe it or not. He urged to leave the academy, and he went to the University of Alabama. He persisted his academic pursuits and obtained a PhD in clinical psychology from Berkeley. He found success as a clinical psychologist, and he wrote a very well-received diagnostic book in 1957. But he experienced a number of personal setbacks, including the suicide of his wife, and in 1959 decided to travel to Europe. Now, McClellan loved to travel. He was fluent in a number of languages. And McClellan met Leary in Europe. And there are different versions of this meeting. I don't know if this was planned, but I've heard it was an accident. They just ran into each other. How they recognized each other, I don't know. I also heard it was a bike ride. I don't know if it's true or not, but at least that's put forward. Now, McClellan was impressed by Leary's ideas and saw him as a fresh air for the Harvard Clinic. I told you this was now closing. And he offered Leary a one-year appointment at Harvard. But then Leary, in the summer of '60, traveled to Mexico and ingested psychedelic mushrooms. And he became enamored with psychedelic drugs. On his return to Harvard, he initiated drug studies on various populations, particularly prisoners and students of theology. Part of a major research project, also graduate students and faculty. Henry Murray took LSD under McClellan's guidance. And of course, he had a number of very famous counterculture visitors. That's Ginsberg, that's Huxley, Jack Kerouac, all came to visit Leary in Harvard. But he increasingly neglected his duties and was dismissed in 1963 following a university hearing. McClellan says he did not attend that meeting and did not know what was taking place. I don't know whether that's true or not. Although Leary may not have influenced the study of academic motivation, he was at the center of the countercultural movement. The introduction of psychedelics to society altered art, fashion, literature, music, and more. The infamous slogan linked with Leary, "Turn on, tune in, drop out," and its appeal around the world resulted in Richard Nixon calling Leary the most dangerous man alive. Leary said this was his trophy on the wall and his Nobel Prize. Following his death, some of his ashes were rocketed into space. 23 people went into space with him with ashes, circled for 6 years. He wanted to be cryogenically preserved, but there was some problem with it. It didn't work out, so they just shot him into space. I met him once. I had dinner with him with McClellan. So I found him kind of silly and egotistical and something. So I was very disappointed, but a couple other people had that same experience. Some just, yes, not full people, just ashes. Otherwise, it would have been a big rocket ship. 23 ashes, like great, you know. Well, they're people. Just in a different form. Richard Alpert. This is Richard Alpert, on the right. I mentioned his name, Ram Das, or Baba Ram Das. Was a relatively new assistant professor at Harvard when Leary arrived and was assigned to a neighboring office. I mean, having Leary in the neighboring office is a kiss of death, probably. Alpert came from an exceedingly wealthy background. His father was president of a major railway, one of the founders of Brandeis University, Shiva Medical School. And McClellan told me that sometimes Albert's father had his own railroad car, like McClellan was able to ride in it when he went to give it to Opium. It was an boxcar. Albert's research focused on achievement motivation, including the assessment of achievement-induced anxiety, the effects of stress on performance. At Harvard, he rejoined McClellan, who had supervised his master's degree while at Wesleyan. Actually, the Alpert was the godfather to a couple of McClellan's kids. Leary and Alpert became friends. Leary introduced Alpert to mind-altering drugs. He then joined Leary's research projects, explored many psychedelic drugs. They were not illegal. Alpert was fired along with Leary in 1963. Because he was providing drugs to undergraduates. He then lived with Leary in upstate New York, kind of a drug-induced mansion. Held out for a few years, but then he went to India and traveled across India. He met a guru, began a spiritual voyage, lived in a temple, was given the name Ram Das, which means servant of God. Sometimes it's Baba, Father and servant of God. When he returned to the States, he emerged from the airplane dressed in all white, bearded, without shoes, and with prayer beads. He carried neither money the rest of his life, nor identification the rest of his life. This person who a few years earlier had his own plane. He was met at the airport by his incredulous but supporting father. And there's a wonderful documentary, if you haven't seen it, Ram Das, Fierce Grace. It's 2001. And if Can't get a hold of it? It's on Netflix. Get a hold of it. Take a look at it. The fierce grace means how difficult his training was. Ram Dass left the world of drugs to explore meditation, spirituality, and inner consciousness. He gave seminars and workshops. Some of these were on his father's golf course. He looks like McClellan. He brought Eastern ideas, including messages of spirituality and love to the West. The first of his many books, Be Here Now, I sold over 2 million copies. Ram Dass is the only living psychologist included in this talk. He suffered a stroke in 1997, so 15 years ago. He lives in Maui. He gives occasional lectures, interprets his condition as another life passage promoting personal growth. How ironic that McClellan, who tried to improve the plight of the world, it's quite a training, by inducing achievement strivings, was involved with 2 consciousness-raising methods or movements antithetical to the fulfillment through achievement, in that psychological and psychedelic uses and spiritual awakening, both champion living in the immediate moment. So that's the trade process in our path so far. McDougall, Watson, Murray, Hall, Hublin, McClellan, Leary, and Albert. That's the trade process. First 90%. Questions? It's a good time to stop. And let me just do a summary of this, and I hope that was some issues you want to talk about. A number of generalizations may already be reached, although only really 2 of the theoretical approaches in this writing have been introduced. Most evident is that there are linkages between scientists who are often not paired. Jung had some impact on McDougall, even greater influence on Murray. Hull both positively and negatively influenced McClellan, and so on. A second evident conclusion is that one's personal life and encountered environmental events influence scientific beliefs and pursuits. Watson's reported phobia of the dark may have played a role in his choice of little Albert's condition. Morgan's bohemian lifestyle and Jungian immersion altered Murray's career. Murray's training in biochemistry was conducive to enlisting his needs. Hull's desire to be an engineer, inhibited by his physical disability, made him ripe for behaviors. And McClellan's adoption of Quakerism quite likely fostered his achievement change research. Also of great importance for the history of motivation is that World Wars I and II shifted the research focus of many, including Murray, selecting officers, Hublin, to persuasion, and McClellan, to personality. Finally, the history of motivation, just as any other scientific history, embraces a wide-ranging slice of life. Some were born poor, Watson and Hull were very poor. Others rich, McDougall, Morgan, Murray, Hull, and Albert. Some faced with with illness or with death, Morgan, Hull, Hubbard. Some faced with leading lives said that. Others had long and over their healthy lives. Some lives were scarred with marital and scandal and infidelity, Watson, Jung, Murray, Morgan, Leary. Others were faithful and devoted, McDougall, Hubbard, McClellan, and so forth. Hence, a general blueprint for scientific productivity is unlikely to emerge. There appears to be many roads to Rome, and the bumps and freeways encountered changed the travel itinerary. However, at this point in history, the psychological world was small. Most of the roads went through Harvard, McDougall, Murray, McClellan, Albert, or Yale. So that's the trade approach and drive theory. Anything? Anything mind? Anything? Yes, sir. Drive times M, drive times plus. Oh, I totally disagree with that. I mean, it depends on if you got pseudomath. It's just addition and multiplication, but the idea that you could identify determinants of motivation, divide in half, and put them in a mathematical formula was a watershed moment for the field of motivation and influenced all the subsequent roles, Blue and Atkins, value theory. all follow that approach. So what they come to me, some people say it's premature formalism, and I feel the motivation was ready for that, but it certainly was. And the data were quite clear when you were just manipulating hunger and number of reinforced trials 5 times that. So I disagree with it, although intelligent people disagree, but unintelligent people disagree. I'm not a behaviorist, I never was, I was never a big fan of behaviorist approach, but it's a monumental contribution to field motivation, my opinion. And whatever little writing I did about it, if I wrote again, I give it even more credit. I think I underestimated just how valuable it was, what a change it made. Yes. Yes. Same idea, place on that. It's true. It's true. Well, there's a number of reasons for it. The grand theories adopt. So you don't have Howlands and Williams, even Lewin students didn't probably have social psychologists. Howland was dropped out. So there is expectancy value theory that kind of has a place on that. But it's very hard to make specific predictions. It's like, for education in the classroom. It just doesn't fit. And again, these were grand approaches trying to embrace a wide array of data. So I don't know if I can give you why do theories die. This kind of approach, isolated in terms of behavior, specialized in that population, that doesn't exist. I agree with that. But I think for regimes right now, it's certainly not on the horizon. It's too much data, it's too complex. Even with larger phenomena, that's certainly not straight out. Okay, so that's concept I consider. The grand theory. Anything else anybody thought? If you were questions, yes, well, I wasn't so much talking about personal personality as much as historical events and environmental events that change what you study. So World Wars I and II, which really changed the field. And personal experiences like McClellan, Quaker, stuff. Non-profit companies to change the team. I can't say about if you study achievement motivation, it means you're highly achievement, so anxious about anxiety, anxious about achievement. I'd be less certain about that as much as historical influences on what you study. Yes, sir. I never thought of myself that way, quite honestly. I'm an armchair historian, in the sense that I've never gone to the field and investigated anything. I just read what others have written and try and integrate it in some ways. That's just always been fascinating to me, and the older I got, the less research I did, the more I became interested. I'm not sure why. I don't know if I can answer it how. and that's a high input. Just as an intellectual endeavor, we're trying to understand why these things go the way. You sometimes ask them, okay, I've studied education, what's its place in history? Is it going to die and how fast? So I think those kind of questions that are issues. Plus knowing some of the holy figures like the Tiger, makes you wonder what was his history, how did he get where he is? I never self-identify myself as a historian. Well, again, it's strange on myself. So. Okay, well, yes. A lot of them I don't like. Well, I think it's overplayed. I'm a naive psychologist. So it's not that I don't believe in the unconscious. It's also I believe you can tell us a lot about what you did and why you did it. I think the search for the non-obvious in social psychology, social and educational psychology, the search for the non-obvious in social psychology, I think has been part of red herring. And again, it's just my opinion. I think there's an identity issue of are you really scientists, and when you point out something that no one else knows and knew about, you feel better about yourself as a scientist. You didn't know that, did you? I like to say, you did know that, didn't you? And now you really know it, and it has more meaning, and you can put it within a scientific system. So I'm not happy, as you know, with priming. I think you can probably prime thoughts. I don't know if you can prime behavior. I don't know if you're it's saying, you're going to see red. I'm going to see more red in the audience. I don't like stereotypes red. I don't believe most of it. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. If I give you a thing, a piece of paper, and I say, write your name on it, you write Sandra, and now I say, your performance is going to decrease. You didn't know that, did you? That's unconscious. Your name is priming achievement of avoidance. That's unconscious. So, but this is obviously just my opinion. I say this is true. I'm just saying there's in the hands, and I'm in the emphasis on the unconscious. It's not going to have long-term payoff. The TAT died. And the TAT is a measure of achievement. How many studies that I have as a graduate student that are in file drawers didn't pay off. So, I don't base my life on this. But if I have, I hope I haven't offended anyone. Yes. Yep. Yep. I'm willing to take that bet. I'm willing to take that. Any other little non-provocative things you want to talk about?
Mine's a little bit, many people in this particular program this year are looking at identity from a motivational standpoint. How does my sense of self come together as a puzzle? And I'm looking here at the lineage and trying to think about, can I map my own intellectual?
Yes.
Can you tell us why you think that might be a worthwhile thing for a young scholar to do?
Well, first thing is just intellectually interesting that you can trace yourself back. I love to trace myself back to William James because I love Sir Atkinson and I do Truman. So that's just fun, doing the William James. So first thing is fun. The second thing is often you can trace consistencies and ideas. Well, how did you get to be who you are? It's a genealogical search. So I think that places you within a larger historical framework, and that's a sense of identity. Although I don't believe in Atkinson's theory, and he was unhappy that I didn't. I'm happy to say I was a student of Atkinson's. I did so many traditions, and that gives me a sense of place. So, I think every student. to know that. And it's a good assignment. So trace yourself back historically. And where do you think, which of these individuals do you think have some influence on you, even if you didn't recognize it before? Okay, on to Gestalt theory. Are we doing on time? Are we okay? Okay, let's do Gestalt theory. While McDougall was compiling and bringing his list of instincts to Harvard, while Watson was igniting psychology with behaviorism and debating McDougall, and while Jung was exploring the fantasies and dreams of Christiane Morgan, Gestalt psychology was creating excitement in Austria and Germany. A trio of psychologists, primarily working in Frankfurt and then Berlin, Max Wertheimer, Wolfgang Kohler, and Kurt Kafka, were leading this charge. They were little interested in motivation as opposed to perception and learning, but they passed on their concepts and principles to Kurt Lewin, or Kurt Lewin. I've always said Kurt Lewin because I had heard when he came to America, he wanted to be known as an American, he wanted to be called Lewin. Well, Lewin's very last student was Beatrice Wright, who was at Kansas, was Professor Hyder. I knew her. And finally, 3 years ago or something, I ran into her, and I said, Beatrice, was it Lewin or Levine? And she said, well, in the last seminar he taught that I took, he said, I'm Kurt Levine. So generations of students of mine heard Lewin, and that's apparently incorrect. They passed on their concepts and principles to Kurt Lewin, it's hard for me to say that, who was to become a dominant figure in motivation. Now, the Gestaltists argued that percepts are determined by the entire environment in which an object, whoops, there's Lewin and Hall had mutual influences. We'll talk about that. The Gestaltists argue that perceptions are determined by the entire environment in which an object is embedded, as illustrated in a variety of perceptual illusions. First time, top line, second longer. Even the opinions of others determine the perceived length of lines. In a similar manner, Lewin contended that motivated behavior is a product of the total field of forces acting on the person. And the major change was that I think these forces do not reside or emanate from the person, as the instinct, trait, need theorists propose. Again, I think there's a watershed shift, a major shift. In addition, for the Gestaltists, learning is not merely the mechanical, incremental accumulation of associations, as proposed by Campbell and Watson, and accepted by Hall. Rather, learning involves insight of the reorganization of percepts. Building on this idea, Lewin contended that the distance to a desired goal, an important component of motivated behavior, depends on how perceived environments are organized. As the Gestaltists would have predicted, Wertheimer, Kohler, and Kafka are often linked and form a unit because of their proximity and similarity. But each of them made quite unique contributions, and here I'm just going to very briefly, separately discuss them. What many Gestaltists did have in common is that they were Jewish, Kafka, Lewin, Wertheimer. Hence, the Gestalt movement was devastated by the advent of the Nazis. And many adherents immigrated to America where difficulties often were counted. So there are a number of suicides among us, with Egon Brunswick, Elsa Franco Brunswick, Carl Lumber, all suicides, Lewin's son. This may have been in part due to severe restrictions on hiring of Jewish faculty, so Harvard and Yale did not have a Jewish professor until the end of World War II. And it's very interesting, and something I did try and trace down while I was looking at this is Einstein. Princeton, of course, had no Jewish professor, so there's Einstein seeking a job, you know. Einstein never was on the Princeton faculty. He was at the Advanced Institute, and it was funded by Jewish donations. So the question that I tried to trace out was, did Princeton refuse to give him hiring, to hire Einstein or not? And I couldn't get an answer to it. Some historians say, well, he didn't want to be on the faculty. He didn't want to teach. And other historians either don't say anything or say, no, Princeton would not give him a position. It's quite a fascinating little sublet, and I mention Einstein here because Einstein, we'll see later, comes into play in a number of psychologists. Now, so here's Max Wertheimer. That's Wertheimer. The University of Exile, the graduate program of the New School for Social Research, established in 1933, provided Wertheimer with a faculty position in 1935 after he fled Germany. Now, the new school had a progressive origin. It was founded by professors from Columbia University who were dissatisfied with the loyalty oath. And James McKean Cattell, we have this fellowship. We have this Cattell Fellowship. Cattell was fired because he advocated not supporting the draft. He was also Quaker. Now, Wertheimer was a leader of the Gestalt movement. He provided postdoctoral opportunities for Kaufman and Kohler. His training in music and law guided his principles of perception. He first championed the notion that perception cannot meaningfully be separated or reduced into component parts. In support of this position, he often used the example of a melody being different from a mere collection of notes. Music was important throughout Wertheimer's life, and in America, he played chamber music with Einstein. Einstein also, by the way, attended Wertheimer's funeral. A second theme evident in Wertheimer's analysis of perception is that fact and fiction, or reality and illusion, are difficult to distinguish. Gestalt psychology began with Wertheimer's documentation of the so-called phi phenomena, the perception of motion when neighboring lights have flashed in temporal contiguity. However, this is apparent and not real movement. An interest in truth and separation of truth from fiction came from his earlier focus, and his doctoral dissertation concerned legal testimony because Wertheimer was trained as a lawyer. And he was trying to separate in legal testimony what's a lie and what's the truth. And he actually developed a word association test similar to the Jungian word association test. There was actually an argument between Jung and Wertheimer as to who was first. And Jung finally said that yes, Wertheimer had the first word association test. But these perceptual illusions, their history comes from Wertheimer's training in law. He was trying to separate fact from fiction in legal testimony. That was fascinating when I first learned that. Now, Kohler, Einstein and Wertheimer, I mentioned, were close friends, and here's a letter from Einstein. I hope you've understood my scrawl. It's an example of two proofs. Wertheimer also in physics. A certain uneasiness remains, la la. But here's the end of it. I very much enjoyed your visit. Now and again, one has to see with one's eyes what a real person looks like. Cordial to you and yours, Einstein. This is Kohler, who was the only non-Jew among the major Gestalt contributors. He may have exhibited the greatest courage. In 1933, he wrote the last anti-Nazi published article in the newspaper, questioning the Nazis for the dismissal of Jewish faculty. And by the way, the particular person he was interested in defending was Max Planck. So those of you who will someday get a fellowship to study at the Max Planck Institute, as I had at one time, you'll know this traces back to Max Planck, who was a Jewish faculty member, and this was the German government meeting minutes for his institute, the Max Planck Institute. Anyway, he immigrated also to America in 1935. Rather than focusing on perception, Kohler mainly focused on learning and problem solving. In 1913, shortly after completing his dissertation, Kohler went to the island Tenerife, that's off the coast of Africa, where he was director of the so-called Anthropoid Station. It's closed in 1920, but it still kind of exists there with weeds and stuff, a place of cultural interest, it's called. He stayed there for 7 years because it was not possible for a German national to pass through orders controlled by Britain. So all these studies on insight learning were done there. Now, there's been some controversy, and I believe that Cole was actually a spy for the Germans. And that's what he was doing off this coast, sort of a spy on the British fleet. Now, why does one think he's a spy? He was a spy because there was no place for chimps. It wasn't native for chimps. A number of his subjects, a number of his participants, chimp participants died. And the day the war ended, he left. Just picked up all the stuff and left. And found a lot of radio type equipment in his compound. So, I think it's true. But anyway, this is where he studied insight learning. When you think about aha phenomena, you can think about him there. And this is one of his famous chimps pictures. Insight learning, I like that one a lot. Now here finally is Kurt Kafka, labeled the American Gestaltist. He left Germany in the 1920s, never returned. I mentioned before that his lectures at Wisconsin drove halted behaviorists in part. On a more positive note, he brought Fritz Heider from Germany to America in 1930, where he offered him a research position at Smith. For Kafka, the difficulties faced as an immigrant may have been manifested in his marital life. He was married 4 times to 2 women in an ABAB order. Here's the Kafkas and the Kohlers. You can see a very aristocratic scientist. I've read that Kafka was color vision impaired. He studied color contrast. And that's interesting when you talk about personal life because they say Watson had this sort of phobia. And by the way, Fritz Heider, my mentor, was blind in one eye and studied depth perception. So, but it's now on film and available to the public, is that correct? You can watch anytime you want. 100 called people. Assemble some of them. They're hard to get. I don't know what's left of them. Private films. Kafka's analysis extended the enterprise of science, which is identical to his analysis of perception. In both his analyses of vision and science, the component facts are integrated into a whole. In science, this reorganization is called a theory. It's different from or other than. You're not supposed to say more than. He said specifically, it's not more than the sum of the parts. It's different from or other than the sum of the parts. The theory then influences the perception of facts, and vice versa. Okay, all that leads us finally to Kurt Levine. There he is. There's a figure, you know, the regression experiments. Social regression, this is it. That's Levine in the background, that's his nephew. And the prized goodies in the middle. And if you can't get it, I have this one. This was typical of Levine to run the subjects and watch them as a children. No one. Lewin has a number of films. Talk a little bit about the and I actually own these films. Now, Lewin was visiting Vygotsky in Russia. And there was something called the Vygotsky Circle. It was basically an informal network of primarily Jewish psychologists. You see Vygotsky in the middle. And you see Lewin pointing here. That doesn't You see Lewin in the right hand corner. Lewin had a long history of involvement with Russian. A large number of his graduate students were female Russians. Firstly, the fact that they were female was so unusual at that time. And then the fact that they were from Russia, Tamara Dembo, Mitra Karsten, Maria Alexandrina, Bluma Zakharna. These were all Russian graduate students who had studied Korea. This is the Vygotsky circle. You might notice that among the figures in Vygotsky's circle was this filmmaker, Sergei Eisenstein. He's director of many movies, including, there he is, David Lynch, including Battleship Potemkin, and Alexander Nevsky. And Eisenstein was very interested in Berlin analysis of emotion and conflict. And actually, he gave a lecture at the Berlin Institute called it there in attendance, talking about what the performance of the films would be. And the only specific thing I know about is in the study of conflict, when you want to see approach and avoidance forces, when the person goes through a door and goes first, and then goes through, you realize what the counter force is, that in order to overcome the counter force, he really has to go forward. And that was a Lewin idea. Lewin was the first person to really make use of films. He filmed his lectures. He used films for experiments. He had one of the very first handheld cameras in Germany. Anyway, so Lewin was with Vygotsky, and Nazi problems were becoming apparent, and he decided, and I don't know if he didn't go, but he decided to come to America then. And I don't know if he went back to Berlin first, and then went to America, or he went straight from Russia. But he sent a telegram to Hyder, and I think Sandra mentioned, this is now in my possession. And it said, Gurias, and that's really his wife's, this is the second one, so it means Germany is impossible. Our possibility is there, and he's going to get a job. And he says you should ask Boring and Lashley, they're both at Harvard. Tolman had invited him to study to teach at Berkeley. Ogden, it says Ogden, and it's Ogden and McDougall. He's staying with Vygotsky, Vygotsky's address. And at the bottom there you see just a Weiner person is figuring out what is Greenland. You can see on the top it's sent to Hyder and Massachusetts. He, by the way, never had also regular FDE appointment in the United States. He came to Cornell for a couple of years. Then he went to the Iowa Salvation Institute. That was not at the university. FDE, and then he founded the Center for Dynamics at MIT, and then he died. Never had an academic appointment in America. Anyway, he came to America in 1933, and he died of a heart attack. He was a very young man. And the Center for Group Dynamics moved from MIT to the University of Michigan. Dr. Carter took over Lewin's position. 15 minutes? We won't finish, but Lewin completed his PhD at the University of Berlin while he was serving in the Army. During that period, he began to develop his work that was later related to motivation. One week he was wounded in the arm after the Grand Cross on the army individual Anyway, he's recovering from his wounds. He wrote about the war landscape. The field of the soldier, he wrote, is organized into safe and unsafe places. And the perception of the land changes as one moves toward the front line. And that's the beginning of these notions about psychological space. By the way, we'll also study camouflage. This is part of this Western element illusion. And we took from her time and remember this time and from the wrong. Now, Lewin has two distinct theories of motivation. One centers on level of aspiration, operationalized as a distance children stand from a peg when tossing rings over it. The theory specifies that choice behavior is directed by anticipated benefits of success compared to anticipated costs of failure. You'll recognize this as value theory. Benefits are determined by what it's supposed to get and the likelihood of getting it. And level of aspiration is very dominant in achievement research. A second theory of motivation proposed by Lewin is more general, very similar to Holt's theory. Force is a function of needs of a person, balance of goal, etc. psychological distance very much mirrors home. It didn't steal it from home. It's just this three determinants of behavior: something about the person, something about the environment, and something about the distance between the person and the goal object. Now, Lewin shared a number of dissertations. Norman Cartwright, Morgan Deutsch, Leon Fessinger, my friend and colleague Hal Kelly died when this doctoral position died, and Norman Cartwright took over his chair. But unlike the followers of Hall, Lewin students became social psychologists. So in part of the answer to the question, why did the motivational approach continue? For the Lewin students, they went in a different direction. They become motivational therapists. Cartwright a little bit of balance. Okay, there's Lewin. Let me review for a minute where we are. Contributors to three major theories of motivation: trait, driving, gestalt, have now been discussed. In the remainder of the talk, psychology is associated with two additional conceptions: the spectrums of value and attribution are examined. The specific individuals to be considered and their relation to other shared theories are shown here. Here's expectancy value theorists who wanted to get to Atkinson. And Atkinson, of course, was very much influenced by Tarlin and vice versa. And Atkinson was not a student of the Tarlins, except as an undergraduate. Atkinson was influenced by Hollywood theory, believe it or not, by Donald Marcus, who was a student of Tarlins. Atkinson was influenced by Lewin. Then Atkinson also has a great influence from Tolman. Tolman studied with the Gestaltists as well as the behaviorists. And then attribution, only talk about Fitzheimer, and influenced by Lewin and the Gestaltists. So that's where we are and where we're going. I don't know if we want to go there. That's a lot. You want to ask any questions? Never mind. Go to expectancy value theory. Questions? Anything? Yes. Oh, I'm going to run out. That's okay. Way back in 79? That's not bad. That's contemporary. Motivation. I don't think there's a proliferation of theories. I think there's a proliferation of either models or hypotheses or smaller groupings. I don't think that big theories are proliferating. So I would just probably phrase it differently. We have a different definition of theory and distinction between theory and model. Right? Sure. I'm not sure. We can talk about that. I'm not sure. Anything else that I can answer? I think I have to distinguish motivation from learning, and probably different understandings of theory means. So these motivation theories are not just for education, and who's your answer and straight out. So it's a little different idea of generality. Paradigms you can call them. That's true. And then you're into that. It's hard to get a fit with a specific course of theory. Okay, one last, a little expectancy value theory. It's this personal centric. A little bit of expectancy value. Expectancy value approaches the motivation, make the common sense assumption adopted by Lewin and the level of aspiration, and by economists. What we do depends on the value of the goal and what's the likelihood of getting it. So along with Gestalt psychology, expectancy value theory provided a cognitive alternative to the mechanistic approach advocated by Watson and Hall. This is Donald Marquis, born in 1908 and 1973. He was one of the precursors to Atkinson, surprisingly. Received his PhD from Yale in 32, and he became department chair at Yale in 42. He was not a Hollyan in the strict sense of the label, but was a member of the group surrounding him. In 1942, the chairperson of the Department of Psychology at the University of Michigan, Dr. Pilkington, retired, and the department was in need of revitalization. Marcus was offered a job, came in 1945, and within a few years, the University of Michigan Department rivaled that of Harvard and Yale, and thus contributed to the lifting of the anchor of psychology from the East Coast. Among his accomplishments was bringing the Research Center for Group Dynamics to the University of Michigan. I mentioned he completed negotiations with the Lincoln. While chairing the department, Marcus undertook a number of other duties, including president of APA, and supervised the dissertations of students in a variety of fields. And among his students was John Atkinson. So most people think McClellan was Atkinson, which he mentor. He was not. Atkinson was an undergraduate when he studied with McClellan as Wesleyan. So what's very strange is that both McClellan and Atkinson were trained by associates of Hall, Hovland and Marquis, and the very person who they so often criticized, especially Atkinson, stand on it. Atkinson once wrote an article about, what's the title? The Last Nail in the Coffin. Marcus remained chairperson of University of Michigan until 1957. He abruptly resigned because of growing affection for a graduate student. He went to MIT, where he became professor in School of Management at Sloan School, and he was a very productive and successful career after that. I'm talking a little bit about Edward Tolman, and this is Tolman with Lewin and Hoffman. And this is an interesting picture of, that's Tolman's brother with Einstein. Tolman initially was in physics, but he said his brother was so much smarter than he was that he had to change the psychology. Prior to World War II, Kohler protested, remember, the activities of the German government. But after the war, I said Kohler? Prior to World War II, Kohler protested the activities of the German government. But after World War II, Tolman objected to the demands of the American government, for which he too faced negative consequences. For many years, the United States had a loyalty oath that the employees had to sign. I do not believe in, I'm not a member of any party. Recall the University in Exile, which hired Wertheimer, was founded by professors at Columbia University who refused to sign this oath. The University of California instituted a similar oath. Oops. As this. At that time, Kohler was at Berkeley. He had been trained at Harvard, hired at Northwestern. He was fired from Northwestern because he also was a Quaker. And he subjected to the war and draft. And then this Longfield came to the University of California. It added another member of the Communist Party that wasn't in the earlier oath. Employees at UC were required to sign this oath or lose their position. Tolman was among approximately 35 of 10,000 employees who refused. He urged the other faculty members to sign, but he wouldn't. As a leader of the dissenting group, he argued that compliance threatens academic freedom and freedom of expression. He was then fired by the university. A legal battle ensued that Tolman and his colleagues won, reinstating their jobs after more than a 2-year layoff. They were also paid their lost wages. But then when Clark Kerr became the chancellor of the university, he renamed the Ed Site building at Berkeley Tolman Hall. And this was part of the restitution. About 15 years later, the United States was involved in the Vietnam War. Among the most vocal protesters to this conflict who were part of the free speech movement were students at Berkeley, and this Mayor Savio all the way on the right, and students at Columbia University, at the microphone. A culture of dissent had been established at these institutions and remained in place. Thus, with appropriate care not to engage in overstatement, I mentioned this before, 3 major cultural movements in America in the last 50 years, psychedelics, Eastern spiritualism, and the free speech movement, partially owe their beginning or persistence to psychologists and the relations of all this. Cole, Leary, Ramdas, Patel, Tolman, predominantly in the university. So this is not realized that we didn't have innovation psychologists. Eastern spiritualism and free speech, traced back to us. All right. Coleman, like McClellan, was a bridging or integrated figure. Here you see, whoops. Here you see Coleman brought together Lewin. McClellan combined the laboratory rigor of behaviorism that he learned as a graduate student at Yale from Hall and Hubbard, the individual difference of the trait approach that he adopted from McDougall. Tolman, on the other hand, combined the objective experimental tenets of the behaviors that he became familiar with at Harvard with the field approach of Gestalt psychology. He studied for a short time in Germany with Kafka, and while at Berkeley, invited Lewin to be a visiting professor. In contrast to Hull, but similar to Gestalt psychologists, Tolman did not accept the idea that learning was response, just reverse responses. I'm going to skip this. Let me skip Tolman. Let me skip more. I want to move down to that. Wrap it up. Sam just says wrap it up. Well, that's my mentor. That's me with my mentor. So that's that. I'm going to read the ending. I'm going to skip attribution theory. How can I do that? Oh, so I can skip it. Good. Okay, here's my conclusion. Time takes much away. Gone are many institutions in a scientific setting. The parapsychology lab at Duke, the Gestalt Center in Berlin, the university, by the way, I visited Humboldt University, and I didn't even know what the Gestalt movement was. The Gestalt Center, the University in Exile, the Anthropoid Station in Tenerife, the Child Welfare Research Station in Iowa, all gone. Departed also with the exception of Ron Dodds and all these remarkable contributors to the history motivation. Many were intellectually gifted. McDougall was a Renaissance person. Watson, I mentioned, was the youngest PhD in history in Chicago. Murray graduated at the head of his medical class. Wertheimer discussed physics with Einstein. Lewin was a genius. Many led colorful lives. Think of Watson, Newton, Morgan, McDougall, Leary, Alpert. Many had the courage of their convictions, so McClellan refused to fight during World War II while Atkinson trained bombers. Kohler publicly reprimanded the Nazis. Tolman would not sign the loyalty oath. Even Leary was jailed for possession of psychedelic drugs many times. He didn't give up on it. Ram Dass gave up his material health. As previously revealed, what is perhaps most astounding is that the three movements change American cultural history. And Kurt Lewin even contributed to filmmaking. There's another descriptor of these theorists, so I'm going to have to discuss. Way down, you just forget all those. There's another descriptor of these theorists. This figure suggests a distinction between what might be labeled originating versus integrative theorists. Originators, and here's Lewin. Originators not only create new theory, but also influence the development of other theories. So here's Lewin influencing attribution theory, tremendously influencing Tolman and expectancy value theory, having a direct influence on Atkinson. Here's Howell, he's another originator. You see, he influences McCullough and Huffman and Tolman. They're initiators of theory. But then there's theoretical integrators. And here's McClellan. He brings together Murray and Howell and Atkinson and Hubbard. Here's Atkinson. He brings together Tolman and Lewin and Marquis and Cohen. Here's Tolman. Tolman brings together the Gestaltists and the Hollands. So I make a distinction between these. They're all good theories between instigators and integrators. One might then speculate that Hull and Lewin are the giants in the history of motivation. And they should have the longest name recognition and deepest impact. Tolman in part agreed with this assessment, declaring that Lewin would have a longer scientific life than Freud. Actually remains proven. What is more evident from this abbreviated history is that all these extraordinary figures lay down building blocks for science and for culture. That's it. Thank you so much.